I would like to introduce to you, and I'm going to have you look at the screen on the left and introduce to you Johnny Schreiber, who is the Legislative and Regulatory Counsel with MAR, to talk to us about nitrogen safe areas, something you may or may not know anything about, but hugely important. So, Johnny, if you would like to take over, again, it's left screen. If you need help advancing the slides, please let us know.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Sorry if it's a little choppy because I'm new to EXP world. It's very cool and I'm still getting used to everything. So yes, I know you guys are all on top of this. There's a lot going on right now with Title V stuff. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of background, a brief explanation of some of the things that have changed. I will also probably be repeating myself that there are likely things that are going to continue changing because what happened was there was a very long regulatory process. There were a lot of comments put in, and then the regs came out, and there are a lot of questions about some of the specifics of the regs. What does everything mean? How does it all work in the real world? As often happens when there's new laws or new regulations, there may be the need for some cleanup. We've been in contact with the Department of Environmental Protection, who has been working through this whole process, and they've invited us to provide feedback, to ask questions. And my understanding is that they're planning to put out some sort of clarification at some point in the coming weeks. So through this presentation, if you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them, but also understand that I may have, the answer may be, well, we're still waiting clarification on that, and or you may raise issues that we haven't thought of, and ones that we can then raise with DEP to try to get you those answers. So please feel free to ask me any questions you have, and I'll do my best to answer them. So how do I see what is being presented here?
On the top where you see screen zoom on, you should see something different from the stage, but there's those magnifying glasses on the top where it says screen zoom, Johnny.
Yep.
And you click on the one on the far left, the magnifying glass on the far left.
Yeah. Okay. How do I change the slide?
I can do it for you. Would you like me? Just tell me to advance, and I'll just keep clicking for you.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
You ready?
I'm ready to go.
Okay.
So
here you go.
Sorry. Go back to the first slide. Just a very broad overview here is why this is happening. Right? Is that the state has identified nitrogen pollution, largely coming from wastewater, is particularly harmful to these very specific bodies of water that exist along the shoreline. Many of them are concentrated on the Cape, and I think these conversations in a lot of aspects, the Cape has been the lead because of their long history with septic and sewer issues, as well as an area where there's great concern about environmental issues. And sort of underpinning all of this is that this is largely a response to a lawsuit. The Conservation Law Foundation filed a suit in 2021 that was put on pause. I said settled. That is a term of art that may suggest more finality than actually exists, but at a minimum, the suit is not going forward at this time, in part because of these regulations. So, the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection and a couple of towns were sued, and DEP basically said, okay, we will change our outdated laws and rules on this to better address the contamination we're seeing in these bodies of water. And so that's sort of the genesis of these new regulations. Next slide.
Oh, didn't go. There we go.
There we go. Yeah. So this is kind of so we started in this place. There was a group put together that was sort of examining the issue, trying to come up with new regulations. Their goal is to reduce nitrogen pollution, and they came up with basically an avenue where towns basically have two choices. They can pick one option, which is that all homeowners in the town will need to upgrade. Oh, can we go
Look.
back to that?
Somebody, yep, hold on. Somebody's touching the screen.
Sorry, that was me.
Take your hands
I
away
was trying to
from the
minimize
screen.
my thing. Sorry.
No worries. So there are basically these two roads that towns can take, and they can either say, we're going to have every homeowner upgrade their system, which is very expensive based on estimates we've seen. It's $25,000 to $30,000 plus. System alone can cost that. You have upkeep expenses. You have other expenses to basically put your yard or your driveway back to the condition it was prior to having the upgrade. Or towns can seek this permit. Oh yeah, and the time frames are different. So they were saying at this time when initial drafts came out, homeowners have to do this all within 5 years. So here you go, homeowners, you all have to do this. Here's a $30,000 unfunded mandate. You have to do it in 5 years. Or towns can seek this, what is called a watershed permit, and basically town will apply to get this permit, which requires them to come up with a plan for how the town writ large is going to decrease their nitrogen pollution and handle this issue. And you have 20 years to do this. DEP will monitor over you that time to make sure you're sticking to your plan and continuing to remain in compliance. It may raise taxes, but it's doing so in sort of a more equitable way where everyone is paying their share rather than homeowners sort of footing the bill. So we provided comments along with, at that time, the regulations were broader as well. It wasn't just the Cape, it was South Shore, Southeastern Massachusetts. We worked with Cape and Islands as well. All the local associations, and we facilitated comments from everyone that this was hugely problematic for homeowners. We need to extend the compliance period, and that this is a community issue that we really need the towns to be taking on rather than the homeowners. Next slide, please.
Johnny, can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
The 20 years, does that mean that the town has 20 years to apply and present their plan and have the plan approved, or do they have to have the plan completed in 20 years?
It's the latter. So it's basically a plan that occurs over 20 years. So they may have, so that's how long the permit is good for. So you basically have a plan, present it, and if the state says, here's our stamp of approval, then this is a 20-year plan. But there are checkpoints along the way, right? So by year 5, we will do X. Okay, well, DEP is looking over your shoulder. And so if you don't approve it, you're going to put yourself in jeopardy of not having the plan work anymore, right? So,
and what is the timeline or the deadline for the town to apply for this watershed permit?
Yeah, so let's go to the next slide and we can talk more.
Sorry, I'm ahead of myself.
No worries. So that was just the initial kind of where things started, and here's where things ended. The DEP was actually, they were quite willing to work with us, and they were did a pretty responsible job of making changes to the draft regulations to account for a lot of the concerns. So the big thing they did is they changed the geography. This had previously included Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, South Shore area. They basically stripped all that away for now. Their sort of comment on that made it sound pretty clearly like those areas that were stripped away will likely be coming back, as they are spots where they're hotbeds for this problem. But they felt like the Cape was further along in their sort of process of talking about knowing, understanding this issue. And so the map on the right is actually a screenshot of the official map, and we'll get more into the map stuff later. But what you're seeing there is the dark green areas and on the southern part of the map. Those are areas that were basically already pre-approved, and as of the date that these regulations became official on July 7th of 2023, those areas became nitrogen sensitive areas. They were sort of pre-designated, and on that date flipped into being the real thing. The turquoise area along the upper part of the Cape, that is an area where they're sort of in process of potentially pursuing becoming a nitrogen sensitive area. So in the future, I anticipate that this map may be expanded, and you'll see, South Shore becoming that turquoise color in other areas. But for now, that's where things stand. They extended the notice requirement for the nitrogen sensitive area declaration from 18 months to 2 years. So if you are not already in a nitrogen sensitive area, there is a pretty significant and lengthy public process that needs to happen before kind of the switch gets flipped to declare you one. And that once an NSA is declared, it starts a 2-year clock during which the towns can create their watershed permit plan and apply and go through that process that they want. So there's a pretty extensive kind of lead up period once kind of the process gets moving. There's some improvements in definitions. Previously, it had seemed like a narrower scope of what would be allowed as far as systems that would get you kind of in the clear and safe harbor for this issue. Now they've added some clear definitions that hopefully will be a little bit broader and easier for folks to comply with. And then one of the biggest things was they increased the exemptions for previously installed nitrogen removal systems. So basically, if you have an alternative system that already meets the requirements that are laid out in the regulations, under the prior versions of these rules, they were saying you essentially, unless you did it within the last year, you're going to have to face, changing this if the town doesn't get the permit, right? So if we're in the universe where town says, hey, it's on you, homeowner, to do this, unless you had done something extremely recently, you were going to face a bill. Instead, they drastically expanded that to within the last 10 years. So for these places that were declared nitrogen sensitive areas, on day one, on July 7th, you have a look back of 10 years. So from 2013, July 7th, 2013, is now the look back for when you may have made upgrades to your system, whereas before it would have been only to 2022. And then the watershed permit, which is kind of a whole other part, it's a huge concern for homeowners in terms of a policy issue, but potentially less concerning for them in that it's really the towns are the ones that have to make the plan, have to figure out how to do it, and have to comply with it. There were several tweaks made to kind of that aspect of the rules as well to make the process easier, a bit more flexible, and they focused on kind of getting the maximum return for the minimum amount of effort. They added an aspect of like if you're in a nitrogen sensitive area, but a place where there's limited nitrogen pollution, there's sort of some different things that you can do to make it easier to access the permit. Next slide, please. So under the regulations, there are kind of two universes of how and timelines of when you'll need to comply. One is for new construction and the other is for existing homes. And remember, overarching all of this, kind of the big overlay, right, is still the question of if your town pursues a watershed permit, you very likely are sort of outside this universe. Also, if you are on sewer, you're outside this universe. This is only for people who are in a designated nitrogen sensitive area and who have Title V systems that they're dealing with, right? So new construction is one universe. It's new construction is broadly defined. We are trying to get absolute clarification on whether this would apply to accessory dwelling units. I think it's likely that it would because the definition of new construction is very broad in the regulations, but something that we're trying to have DEP weigh on very explicitly. And so their rule for new construction is that it has to incorporate the best available technology within six months, or starting at 6 months after the date of the nitrogen sensitive area designation. So those dark green areas on the map, they will have 6 months from July 7th when the regulations kicked in and those areas sort of kicked in. So that would place you at January 7th. So starting January 7th, 2023, new construction in nitrogen sensitive areas that will be served by septic will have to use the best available technology. And then for new nitrogen sensitive areas, like in the future, potentially the South Shore or that turquoise area on the Upper Cape, they will have 6 months after the designation takes effect. And remember, I said there's kind of other steps that need to happen. It's a couple-year process. There's some public, public notice elements. So there will be a time and process that should hopefully make it clear. Okay, on this future date, this area will become a nitrogen, become officially designated as a nitrogen sensitive area. And then from that day forth, you count 6 months, and that is when you'll have to have all your new construction will have to comply by having the best available technology.
Johnny, is that date January 7th, 2023 or 2024?
Sorry, 24. Thank you. Yeah, 24. Sorry, that's a typo. So there is also an option where if a town has a fair amount of flexibility in their watershed permit, right? It's just a plan that the town puts forth and says, here's how we're going to reduce our nitrogen pollution. And so if the town chooses to, they can find a way to offset their nitrogen load in other manners that may exempt new construction. It all depends on what the plan is. That seems less likely. I think it's more likely that towns would do that for existing homes rather than for new construction, where they would just sort of say, whatever, it's new, if people have to pay more, it's expensive anyways, and we don't care. But just know that is a possibility. And so, like, for example, if your town is pursuing a watershed permit, that could be a question that people ask, or if you're involved in that process, might want to look into of what the town can do to potentially exempt new construction. And the term they use is suspended, right? Because they can suspend that requirement, but it's not a given that the town will stay in compliance for all 20 years. So it's suspended as long as the watershed permit remains on the books. But if DEP comes in 3 years later and says, well, you're not compliant, so your watershed permit is no good, then we're back to square one. Next slide.
Well, here we go.
So the other universe here is existing homes, and things are a little different here. So there's a period of 7, potentially longer years to upgrade to the best available technology, assuming that there is no watershed permit, right? So there's always this option, town pursues watershed permit, and there's the language here is it's easier to kind of get the carve out for existing homes, or seems more likely that towns would pursue that. So it's likely that existing homes would be carved out if from having the mandate placed on them by the regulations that every single homeowner has to do this. Now, it's possible that a watershed permit could call for something different, right? It could have its own rules or regulations that maybe says, well, people who are out of compliance, or people who haven't replaced their systems in X number of years, you have to do it, right? It could differ by town and by watershed permit. But it's likely that if your town pursues a watershed permit, that you will not have a mandate placed on every single homeowner to potentially do something. And remember, there are other carve outs here, right? There's the 10-year carve out, right? Where if you upgraded your system already, you wouldn't have to, even if we're in the sort of homeowner responsibility, not town responsibility universe. But assuming we are in the town responsibility universe, and you haven't upgraded your system within the 10 years of the NSA designation. So just by way of example, that magic date of July 7th, when that dark green area, everyone became a nitrogen sensitive area and who lives in that dark green area, assuming that you did not upgrade your system, within the window of July 7th, 2013 to July 7th, 2023, then as of July 7th, 2023, you have and the town is not going to pursue the permit, you have a 7-year clock. So it's there's a 2-year period that starts upon the NSA designation that I referenced earlier, whereby the town can come up with its plan, take these steps, whatever they're going to do. And at the end of that 2 years, should the town say, nope, we don't want to pursue a permit, or they try, but they don't get one, whatever happens there, if we're not in watershed permit world, we're in homeowner responsibility world, then a 5-year clock starts. So that gets you to that 7 years. There's a lot of like dates and stuff swirling around. I hope people are comfortable with that. I'm happy to talk about it further. If not, we can go to the next slide. So the regulations include a disclosure requirement. On the right side of the screen, I have the Cape and Islands. They put up kind of an emergency page with a lot of great information about this, and it includes this disclosure that I have on the screen. MAR is going to be working on our own disclosure. All their disclosure says is basically, as of this, this date, July 7th, 2023, you provide the address of the property, and it basically says there's the possibility that you'll be subject to an upgrade. Now, the reason why there's not kind of more certainty there is that the July 7th, 2023 is the beginning date of a 2-year period, right, in which the town can choose whether to take steps, and they may take a step that exempts you from this, but we don't know that right now. So, there's other existing disclosure obligations. The new Title V disclosure requirement says it has to occur prior to the transfer of title. So that means, deals that are sort of currently in the pipeline, or you may, have contracts signed even, right? But as long as the title hasn't transferred, you're still falling under the requirements of this new disclosure. You have to disclose both to the person who is, or the party that is purchasing the property, as well as your local board of health. And what you have to disclose is whether the facility is subject to an upgrade. So it's on the seller to determine whether or not they are actually in a nitrogen sensitive area. But what they actually are disclosing is whether you're subject to the upgrade. So right now, since we don't know what towns are doing, that's why there's this sort of uncertain language in the disclosure. But in the future, when you'll know what towns are doing, let's say you're located in a town that has a watershed permit that does not require existing homes to do this upgrade, well, then you, as the homeowner, would have the home seller would have a duty to look up your address, find out you're in an NSA, find out whether or not the town has done this, and then you could possibly be exempt from the disclosure if you will not be subject to an upgrade, right? Because the town has got a watershed permit. Now, it probably makes sense to continue doing some sort of disclosure. This is what we need to sort of clarify on what exactly we want to do. But language sort of similar to what's on the right of you may be subject to it might be of use, because if the town, something changes or they fall out of compliance with the watershed permit, suddenly you might have to face an upgrade requirement, even if you didn't at the time of the transfer of title. So still some kind of outstanding questions in terms of what like best practices around this should be, and what exactly DEP thinks about in terms of what they're doing with this disclosure and what they're trying to accomplish.
So Johnny, would you say at this point, because it's still a moving target, it's best for anyone in Barnstable County representing the seller or the buyer to present this disclosure, just because it has the vague language that says this may involve an upgrade? It may. I mean, is that on the safe side?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
I think that makes the most sense right now, and it's the only one that is available right now. Like I said, MAR is working on one as well, and so I don't have strong. Ours will probably be similar. Like I don't have strong thoughts on Cape One or R1, whatever is whatever folks prefer or like better. We'll work with Ryan as well in terms of like what they think or what they want to accomplish, but. That, yeah, I would say is a best practice. It makes a ton of sense to do it now because we're doing our best to interpret brand new regulations without guidance yet. We're hoping to get more guidance from DEP, and things are gonna naturally shake out within the next couple of years here, where we will know with greater certainty whether certain towns, certain areas will be subject to potentially getting the upgrade, which is what you're disclosing about, right? And so once we know with greater certainty whether you'll be subject to an upgrade, whether your property will be subject to an upgrade, then we can potentially reevaluate, what makes sense to disclose, if anything. But for now, yeah, it's all just, it's possible that your property will be subject to an upgrade.
Is there any history? Are there any other states that have done this already that we could kind of look at and say, well, they've done it and this is the disclosure they used? Or are we kind of setting the trail here?
I am not familiar with other states that have done it, but I can look more into if there are folks that have.
Because that might be helpful, because if we can say, well, Florida has already done this and this is the disclosure they used and this is what they're doing, then perhaps we can kind of tag on to that. And I won't say copy, but just kind of take some, some advice from what they've already done. Just thinking out loud, maybe that would be helpful.
Or at least, and it may not be the exact same situation,
right,
but maybe something similar, a similar circumstance with an environmental issue.
Yeah, if you could, that would be really helpful. Thank you. All right, you want the next one? Here you go.
Yeah, so this is I kind of already covered some of this. So basically, who determines if you're within an nitrogen sensitive area? The regulations put that on the owner. I included the link there, which is a sort of a crazy link. If you just Google search like NSA Title V, Massachusetts, the Department of Environmental Protection has a website that has several resources, including the actual regulations where we're getting all this stuff from, as well as a link to this map. The picture I shared earlier with the dark green and the turquoise is actually a screenshot of that map, and it has an address entry. So you can actually enter your address and it will tell you whether or not it falls within a nitrogen sensitive area. That is a requirement of the disclosure part, but it is only step one of the disclosure. The disclosure itself, again, is actually about whether you'll be subject to an upgrade. So you can determine whether you're in an NSA, but if you're on sewer, not subject to an upgrade. If you upgraded within the last 10 years, not subject to an upgrade. So there are several circumstances where, again, we're still figuring out whether it makes sense to disclose something, but you may be carved out of the technical language of the disclosure itself. And as I said, so there's still these unknowns in terms of what about towns that haven't yet sought watersheds? What about towns that have? Is that going to cause tax increases or special assessments for homeowners, right? Because they're taking this problem and instead of saying every homeowner has a responsibility, they're saying everyone in town has a responsibility. So what does that mean? What's their plan? How are they going to accomplish it? Are they going to move to sewer? Are they going to do something else? And I think one of the reasons why DEP kind of focused on the Cape is because of that many of the towns have been talking about these issues already, and some already have plans, if not in place, well on their way, that will help address some of these issues. And I think there's also, the state is working on kind of funding aspects of this. There's proposals to drastically increase funding available for the upgrades or for to get more towns to be on sewer. So hopefully there will be more resources available as well, especially if towns lean into the homeowner responsibility rather than the watershed permit. But I think the design of this solution is largely done with the hope that towns will step up to the plate and that the homeowner requirement is far less desirable. You're going to have a lot of upset homeowners if you do that, and folks who run town governments would potentially have challenging re-election campaigns, right? If you've hurt a lot of homeowners. So I think that's the design here, is that's sort of a poison pill to get towns to do the permit, but remains to be seen how that will play out in actuality.
Is there a place we can go to get copies of each town's permit? For example, I looked in Harwich. Harwich has applied for the permit and has a permit. Where would I find that? Because you said that there are dependent. Are they going to raise taxes to fund it? What are they going to do? How does it affect the homeowner? I mean, is there a place that you can go? Because each one's going to be different.
Yeah, so not yet. I don't know if DEP may, on sort of a resource page, compile them. That would be helpful. They have not that is not like stated anywhere that is going to happen. Your local board of health should know whether or not how they make that public, or whether or not they have it on their website, or like that may or may not be easy to access. And I note that in addition, the disclosure requirement has two prongs, right? Again, it's one is to your buyer, but one is to your local board of health. And I think it's still an open question how exactly that happens. Like, maybe if there's towns that want to pursue that, they'll have some sort of portal or an online form or something. But as of now, there's no infrastructure set up for that. So are you calling them? Do you fill out paperwork with them? Like, they're gonna, just like we're creating disclosure forms, they'll have to create whatever they're gonna do if they pursue that avenue of compliance.
The link
I know
that
we have a
gave-
lot of questions. Go ahead.
The link I gave for Cape and Islands, that kind of has a vague summary of where the towns are at this time. Certainly everyone down here is keenly concerned and aware of this. And so I would suspect there may be some kind of a report card. I would hope it's something that I will continue to ask for, so that we can, because for me, the fine line is, we want to be the source of the source. I'm going to say that 8,000 times as loudly as I can. We do not want to give definitive information. For the most part, we want to point them towards the town. But when these things are absolutely black and white at some point, which one can only hope they will be, then we can share that certainty. Because like I just shared this with clients, and they're like, their heads are exploding, right? I mean, most people don't see past the 5 years, $30,000. They just, I keep going, no, take a breath. This will probably be after our lifetime. Like, don't, but I can't guarantee that either. But there's so much uncertainty that this is making people's heads explode right now.
Johnny, who polices it, and what are the penalties for not complying?
So it's policed locally by your Department of Public Health, and at the state level, even though I guess it's sort of all local because it only impacts a small amount of the state right now. But at the state, it is policed by the Department of Environmental Protection. And there's, I don't know off the top of my head what the compliance is, but my understanding, like, they can fine you and they can probably sue you. I wouldn't recommend willful non-compliance, certainly.
Yeah. Wow. I'm sure I've been looking at a lot of questions. Will you open your mics if you have something? I know there was one about whether it applies to commercial. I would assume it's all properties, correct?
Yes, it is
Okay.
all properties.
Okay.
Served by a system, right?
Right. A septic system. I know there were a lot of questions. Feel free to open your mics and ask.
Yeah, and I put my email address here too. If folks have them and for whatever reason don't want to share here, have to run, feel free to shoot me an email. Like I said, we are collecting questions and issues to raise with DEP. So, even if I don't have a great answer, like, I am happy to raise it with them. That is part of their function now, is to try to help us, make sure we can comply.
I know one of the questions was, is it all the Cape? And I think, Johnny, you said earlier, it's best to we're going to assume it's all Barnstable County and just go for it. So at this point, it's best to give the disclosure to anyone on the Cape, because it has the language that says it may impact you. It's not a definitive thing, but that way you're covered. So I would say for the time being, just for everyone.
Yeah, so I think we're still figuring out what a best practices should be. I would say this map here is a screenshot from the website. I would say, and that has an address entry. So you can enter your address. If you are not in a nitrogen sensitive area, you are not covered by these regulations. So you could, it's possible they expand in the future, they change. Whether or not, like, and if it's not turquoise, there's not a nitrogen sensitive area designation kind of pending right now. So I don't know that if you're in the just tan areas of the map, I don't think you need to necessarily do anything. But if you want to, because you're out of an abundance of caution, you think that makes sense, you can. But there are certain areas where either there's not significant concerns about pollution, or there aren't those estuaries and embayments that they're trying to protect, right? So this will by necessity only impact certain areas. It is coming for much broader swaths of the Cape, or not the Cape, for the state. This is might be the universe of where it is on the Cape, but it's coming for the South Shore, and it's likely coming for other spots in the state as well. But certainly, if you are, you enter an address and you're within this dark green area, those areas are clearly covered right now by an NSA, and so you are subject to all the requirements of the regulations to the degree that we can know them at this point. I think there's a greater question about sort of if you're in like that turquoise area where things are pending, you are not technically covered yet, and you won't be until that final NSA designation kicks in, and then your timelines start. So I don't necessarily think that you need to provide a formal disclosure, but I certainly think that is a useful conversation to have with clients about where things stand to the degree that you know them and what might be coming based on what we know from these dark green areas.
I think I'm just thinking out loud as you're thinking in my head as you're talking. We already, hopefully, all good agents would when listing a property, would check floodsmart.com to make sure it's not in a flood zone. They would check the lead safe website to make sure that there's no issues with lead, and they would also check the town hall for building permits. So I guess I would recommend then that this just gets added to the list of our due diligence as listing agents, to say one more thing that we research, and which is to type in your address into that website to find out if that listing falls into the nitrogen sensitive area. And maybe that's our first step. You just add it to your list of due diligence things that you are researching prior to taking a listing.
Yes, I think that determination is really, really important. And so that makes a lot of sense to me. And then you have to evaluate what makes the most sense for you as a next step. If you're not, if you're not clearly within one that is a nitrogen sensitive area that's been determined yet, then you have some more flexibility in terms of what, what makes sense for you.
John, I have a question real quick. If they're doing it, and this might be too detailed, but when they're doing a Title V inspection, that's not something they necessarily look for. There's no parameter. There's no way of knowing, even if it passes Title V, if it'll pass the threshold for nitrogen safe, correct?
So they're two. I mean, short answer is yes. They're two separate things, but like they're not unrelated. So if your system is, if you've upgraded it to an alternative system that falls within the requirements that DEP says, meet their threshold, and let's say you upgraded it in 2020 and you got a great system then, and it's within the bounds, and you get it inspected and it passes inspection, then you're good on all fronts, right? So like they are related, but they're not gonna tell you, they're like, if you get an inspection, they're not gonna be like, well, you passed the inspection, but your system's from 2012, and so if this right, like they're just sort of two different lanes that I don't think are gonna necessarily talk to each other.
Okay, so it's not like in the the 6-page document. It's not going to be one of the things that they can necessarily mark. Yes, it's susceptible. It passes the nitrogen safe threshold.
I don't believe so. No, that would be on like the homeowner, the seller, to determine whether or not it meets the requirements. If you're in that universe and you need to know, right, like that would require, I think, additional other conversations that wouldn't be covered under that process.
Okay, super. Thank you.
Any other questions? I saw a bunch of them coming through. Don't be shy. This is kind of confusing. It's a moving target.
Guys, Will you have like a recording of this at all? Because I missed some of it this morning. I was having a hard time signing on through the mobile app.
Deb, I believe you've recorded it. Is that true?
It is being recorded, yes.
Yep.
So do I access it in Workplace? May I just ask where I go to get the recording, please?
Sure. It'll get posted out to Workplace in a couple hours, and then you'll be able to rewatch it.
Thank you.
Louis, you had something.
Yeah, so out of curiosity, if a town applies for the watershed permit, what are some of the things town can do to reduce the nitrogen if homeowners aren't going to be responsible for it? Like what does that look like?
Yes. So there's these, it starts to get real technical real fast in terms of like the science that are not like, that is not in the regulations. It's just like you got to meet certain guidelines of your nitrogen pollutants. So I mean, the very sort of obvious basic ones are like transition more to sewer. I don't know if there's municipal buildings that are, polluting, maybe clean those up. But yeah, there's, it's very much up to the towns sort of how they want to do it, what steps they want to take. The process is all trained on like, can you meet whatever this flow level or these pollutant levels, right? So whatever steps they want to take to do that. And I would imagine a lot of that would be pushing for sewer in towns, or at least a portion, right? I think that's kind of the big picture solution for some of this. And maybe, like I said, I mean, I don't think it's out of the question for towns to make some requirement for homeowners. Like, yes, we're going to pursue the watershed permit, and maybe they say, okay, all homeowners with systems that are 20 years old need to upgrade or something. They could do a homeowner requirement that is something different than what the state is saying is the sort of poison pill alternative to a watershed permit. But it remains to be seen. I don't know enough about the science here to tell you like, oh yeah, here's a really obvious thing. I know other places there are other processes to help reduce nitrogen pollution aside from sewer. And I think there were regulatory changes during the process from the draft versions that make those more available, whereas before that had been more narrowly drawn. Stuff with like sand and I don't know, filtration systems, but I'm not well versed enough to know like, okay, yeah, these towns do X, Y, or Z steps, like that for sure is gonna get them to where they need to be.
No, thank you. Yeah, I didn't know if they maybe had something that they can like put in the water to help neutralize the nitrogen. I know like in Worcester with Lake Quincy, you get the algae blooms and all this other stuff, and they're like, don't swim in it, we're going to treat it. And then, so I didn't know if that was a possibility, and maybe that's where the cost is, as far as taxes and stuff would have to increase to cover the cost of that. But I can do
and like that certainly is possible. Like it's possible. I don't know enough about the science here to say for sure, but yeah, it's possible.
No worry. Thank you.
Johnny, this is awesome. I mean, this was so informative. And again, you said it's a moving target. We understand that. We know that the minute we put something in writing, it's going to change. We're aware of that. But at least as agents, we're skilled enough now to know to be able to go out and have a conversation. We know where to look for the information. We know where to find a particular house, and whether it's in one of these zones or whether that particular town has applied and received a watershed permit. So we're armed with a lot, and we thank you very much for that, because it just makes us that much more informed and more skilled at what we do. So thank you for this.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I wish I had more clearer instructions for everyone, but that's where things stand now, and I'm hopeful that within the next couple of months we'll have like significantly greater clarity on exactly what to do, and I'd be very happy to share that with you when we have it. But you guys are on the forefront here, so
Thank you.
yeah, I think it's an incredible value you can provide to clients.
Thank you. We'll have you back when you have updates. You and I will stay in touch. And thank you to Lisa Parento and Catherine Taylor at MAR for connecting all of us together so that we could bring you here today. So appreciate everybody pitching in, and we're going to work on some language need be that you have to present to your consumers, because let's face it, this went into effect on July 7th. And as Johnny said, anything that's currently under agreement that has not yet closed still needs to have language, still needs to be disclosed to both the buyer and the seller, that this is a potential problem for their home. So
and everybody just copy down those two links, the Cape and Islands
yes,
link and the state link. Like I just have a separate thing in Apple Notes with those two links because again, source of the source. We just want to
exactly.
lead them to that stuff and tell them to take a deep breath. That's at least what I'm doing.
I'm with you. I'm with you. So thank you all. This was tremendously informative and very helpful to everything we're doing. And again, it's not just the Cape and Islands. It's coming soon to a area near you. So South Shore, you're not off the hook yet. It'll be over the bridge in no time. You know it. The more familiar we get with this whole process, the better we'll be. So thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time. And if you have any questions, you have Johnny's email. You can reach out to us and we'll get in touch with them and we'll get your questions answered, because I'm sure when you start digesting this, it'll all, you might have more questions later. All right. Thank you all. Johnny, thank you again.